go to college. I left Nigeria because I didn't want to become a doctor. So I left Nigeria because I was fleeing the study of medicine. And when I came to the US, I did not want to study literature. And I say this with much love and respect for all the literature scholars here. But I knew that I didn't want to study literature because I felt that there was something about the study of literature that could be, that had the possibility of restricting the creative part of me, which I felt that I very much wanted to nurture. And I thought that the way to nurture this part of me was to study something that was not a science, but that also was not literature. And what I loved about the American college system was this ability to take classes in all kinds of things, which is what I did. And in my junior year, I had to scramble to invent a major because I really didn't have a major. I took classes in music and philosophy and history, which just didn't happen in Nigeria. And I think it's one of the things that I found constricting about my education in Nigeria, that when one does well in school and one is told that one has to become a doctor, or maybe a pharmacist, maybe an engineer, and then maybe the least that's acceptable is a lawyer. But apart from that, nothing else. And what it does is that it puts you in a very narrow track. And so for most of my education, I had focused on the sciences. And I remember just being so bored in class. The lecturer would be talking about, the biochemistry of the human brain or something, and I would be writing bad poems at the back of my notebook, and that's when I realized it was not a good idea. And I was also mostly concerned about the possible inadvertent death of my future patients. That the best thing would be to leave medical school and not complete it. But although I had actually thought that if I did complete medical school, I had it all planned out. I was going to become a psychiatrist because I felt that this was the best thing about medicine that could then be compatible with my writing. I was going to, during the day, see my patients, and then at night I would use my patients' stories for my fiction. Now, of course, at the time I didn't really think about the ethics of it. But I would change the names, so it's. But I think that leaving medical school is one of those decisions that I am very grateful that I did and that I could do. But coming to the US and taking all of these classes and just wanting to learn, I think of myself as an internal, just an unending student. And for me, every day is an opportunity to learn. And so in watching America, observing, reading, learning, I found myself taking notes, observing things, noticing things, questioning things. And at some point, I think I realized that I wanted to write a novel about what it meant to be a person like me, who came to the US without quite getting it, and who then somehow has to kind of stumble through a sense of the kind of disorientation that comes with trying to understand a new place. And I also, one of the major things I didn't get when I came to the US was race. I grew up in Nigeria. I didn't think of myself as black because I really didn't need to think of myself as black. I like to say that we have many, many problems in Nigeria, but race is not one of them. And we also, of course, as I think every country in the world has, we have divisions based on identity, and these divisions are religious and they're ethnic. And also I think class, which we don't talk about as much. But because race is not part of Nigeria's history in the way that, for example, it is in South Africa or even Kenya and other countries in Southern Africa, when I came to the US, to suddenly realize that this new identity of black had been thrust on me was very strange. And I remember at the time when I first came to the US, I had like most of the world consumed a lot of American culture. So I think part of me imagined that all Black Americans were like Bill Cosby. And so it was a bit of a shock to drive through West Philadelphia and to realize, I mean, one of the things that for me was shocking, is the knowledge of it that was shocking, was just discovering poverty in America. And I think this is true for many people who see America through film and music. There's a great distortion in the idea of what America is. And so to discover poverty, for me, was just, I remember driving through West Philadelphia, and it was a kind of forgottenness. I mean, there's no such word, I just made it up, but I just sensed that it wasn't just poverty, but it was a neighborhood in which the buildings were boarded off, there was dirt, and it was just a sense of forgottenness. And it was, for me, one of the discoveries, I just thought, really? This too is America. And even more so, I think, the idea that driving 1 mile down and suddenly I was in the green and beautiful suburbs of the west, of the main line, and that too was just shocking. Not, of course, to say that those massive class divisions are somehow better if they're farther away from each other, but just that the visual nature of it was striking to me. But also discovering that I was Black. And in talking about race, I find increasingly that I need to make the distinction. I say it because recently I was speaking at a school, and this young woman was very earnest, and she said to me, do you wish you weren't Black? And it was well-meaning, so I wasn't offended by it, but it was important for me to say, no, I'm actually very happily Black. I wouldn't change anything about the way I look. For me, so discovering Black wasn't that I didn't know in looking in the mirror that my skin was the color of milk chocolate, which I was very happy with, but it was discovering that having skin the color of milk chocolate came with certain assumptions in America, and that those assumptions were mostly negative assumptions. And for me, that was eye-opening. Again, I had come from Nigeria, and I think for people who are familiar with Africa, many other Africans will tell you that we Nigerians are known, whether for good or bad, as particularly pleased with ourselves. Which would be a nice way of saying it. I often say to my fellow Nigerians, we need to let go of our Nigerian arrogance, because there's very little to be arrogant about. But we're sort of, there is a certain sort of cultural Nigerian trait of, you can conquer, you can do it. And so to come to the US and discover that to be Black meant somehow that I was supposed to have understood that I was somehow inherently inferior was just really, I didn't get the memo. And I really didn't. And one of the striking memories for me was being in my undergraduate class, and it was the first essay that we'd written for this class. And it was actually my first year in the US. And the professor comes in and he says, this was the best essay in class, and I want to know who wrote this. And he called out my name, and when I raised my hand, he looked surprised. And it was a very small, fleeting moment, but it was the weight of that moment is something that has stayed with me, because what I realized was that he didn't expect the person who wrote the essay to be Black. And I had come from a place where people who wrote the best essays were Black. And so it was strange for me. And in some ways, dealing with it meant, for a long time, pushing it away. I did not want to be identified as Black in America for the first 2 or 3 years that I was here. I didn't want to identify as Black. I didn't want to be called Black, because it didn't take very long to learn that in this country, Black was not necessarily a good thing to be. And so when people said, oh, there's the Black Students' Union, I'd be like, no, I don't do that. I'm Nigerian, And I remember, again, early on in my time in the US, and this African-American man referred to me as his sister. And I, very unkindly, I was like, no, I'm not your sister. And at the time, what I was thinking is, I'm not having any of this. I have 3 brothers, I know who they are, I know where they are, you're not one of them. I know the think either of my parents had any other children that we don't know about. But of course, you know, and when I think about that now, I wish, and in some ways this is kind of, there's something almost whimsical about it, but I do wish I could find him, because then I would say, yes, actually, yeah, I'm kind of your sister. But I think what that illustrates is that as a person who had come to the US and who had discovered the layers of race, and I want to be more specific, the layers of blackness, because I think also that often when we say race, it's easy to conflate things, and I think that it's important to be specific in this case. And so, for me, I think what that incident, what it illustrates, is that I was rejecting America's construction of blackness, and I was also, I think, choosing to do what I think most of mainstream America does, which is to define blackness very narrowly. And I was doing that, and so I rejected that narrow definition, and just didn't want to. And so on forms, I would take other. Which now, I mean, that whole sort of form thing in the US is very interesting on its own, right? Because because now I'm very curious when I see these forms, because you find that people tie themselves up in knots, and so sometimes you'll have, you know, Hawaiian, Pacific Islander, and then maybe, and that's a race, and then maybe another race might be Fiji Island, and that's, I mean, it's just really interesting. But then for a long time I would take other, I wouldn't take black, because often black would be black stroke African American, or sometimes it would just be African American, and then I would say to myself, well, I'm Nigerian, so that's not me. And now I don't. Now I take black, and if there's no black, I take African American. I'm like, hey. And the reason I do that partly is that it's also, I think, important to ask, what's the point of these forms? I mean, and my sense is, if the idea is to try and get a sense of the racial makeup of whatever these forms represent, then I think it would be dishonest for me to not take African American, because, you know, just to give a very shallow example, if it were for a makeup company looking to make foundations, I think the black women here know what I'm talking about. Now, if I ticked other, I would be reducing the chances of a wider range of foundation shades. And I don't want to be held responsible for such a travesty. So I think I'm quite happy. I think I'll just open it up to questions.